Hello and welcome back to the channel, folks. HeirofCarthage here, and we're going to have another discussion. Last time when we did a unit spotlight, we got to check out the Flamers of Tzeentch, and this time I wanted to do kind of a follow-up video, though it's still kind of its own video as well, which was the Exalted Flamers of Tzeentch. So when and for what purpose should you look to the single entity upgraded version of the Flamers of Tzeentch that we checked out last time? Now, let's look at some of the key differences between these two units. I'm going to pull one up here where we can kind of go side by side for a comparison. So Flamers of Tzeentch obviously have less overall hit points, and I'm pretty sure it's less barrier too, but it's not by much. It's only 72 there. There's less leadership for standard Flamers. They have less melee attack. They have less melee defense. They have a lot less weapon strength, but it's also because they're not single entities, but still. Just taking a look at the direct comparison, charge bonus is insignificant with these. Both of them have 10 ammunition, and as far as missile damage goes, the single Exalted Flamer does 1.1k, and it is armor piercing, and it has the warp flame. These guys do 338, and so it makes it look like there's a pretty big difference. You would think, just by looking at these stats, that the Exalted Flamer hits considerably harder. However, I feel like it's worth taking a look at these units and kind of see how they function. So, one of the best case scenarios for the Exalted Flamer or the Flamers is when they're facing large, relatively unarmored targets that are of high value, right? I think that's where the Flamers really shine. Hitting those large, relatively high value targets to give you the best value. Now, of course, they can be used to weaken up infantry lines and other stuff before an engagement, because Tzeentch doesn't like fighting a lot of heavy infantry. So sure, it can be used for that, but again, I'm going to take you to what I think is the best case scenario. So let's go check this out. As mentioned, in my opinion, the best case scenario is pretty much this. You're going to fight something from Nurgle that's huge, has relatively low armor, and a lot of hit points. And it's a pretty high value target. So Exalted Great Unclean One. We're going to use it as an example. Look at that. 2 Exalted Flamers opening up from great range. Not super impressive damage. Maybe when he gets a little closer. Much better damage that time. So obviously range plays a role here. The farther away, the less damage we would expect to see. So let's see what happens here. I'm going to cheese the Great Unclean One, and I'm going to move around shooting. Look at that. It wasn't even like a full shot in the Exalted Flamer. You can see right now that the Exalted Unclean One is moving around me in a circle, and it's having to adjust its range, you know, even if it's just a little. And it almost feels like it's not shooting an entire shot, which means that this thing is really going to want things to be still in order to be, at its best. But I'm going to just continue this and kind of let you show how long it takes for me to effectively take out the Great Unclean One here. As you can see, the shots look kind of short from the Exalted Flamer. Like maybe it's not firing its full effect. I mean, can they kill it? Absolutely. So again, in a very best case scenario, can the Exalted Flamers get some damage done? And the obvious answer is yes. They do very high missile damage. If you look here, there was 1482 gold value on the one, and with just a few shots, the other one was already up to 524. So they don't have any problem taking out a big unit like this, which is kind of what I expected. However, just for comparison's sake, let's take a look at this fight again real quick with the standard Flamers, just so we have a bit of a side-by-side. And again, I know this is a very idealized scenario. You're not going to see this on the battlefield, but bear with me. I do have a more realistic scenario to show you. I just want to look at these first. All right, same scenario, but this time with the standard Flamers. We just got a taste, and remember I had to fast forward to the little chase scene to see how long it took these guys to kill. So here's the first volley. That was significantly more damage on the opening salvo. Significantly. Comes the second salvo. This dude is way past half dead. He's down at about 25% hit points after just 2 volleys. 2 volleys. Let's see what happens when these guys start to fire while he's moving. Are they affected in similar ways as the Exalted Great Flamer? And the answer appears to be no. Those guys still hit pretty solidly and are still doing a lot of damage even while he's moving. So, I mean, it doesn't look like, just in terms of DPS, that the Exalted Flamer can stand toe-to-toe with the standard Flamers. Standard Flamers seem like they just deal out significantly more damage especially to this type of target here. I mean, so look at that. They did more damage, which means they killed this thing faster before it started to crumble. So this leads us to an interesting point here, which is it appears that when it just comes to being a missile unit, that the standard flamers are going to be better than bringing the Exalted Flamers. So this is an idealized scenario. Not typical are you going to see Nurgle just walk willingly out and letting you burn him to death with warp fire. So let's go into maybe a little bit more realistic scenario and talk about how I think Exalted Flamers might have a niche in the right spot. Say you're playing some Tzeentch campaign, and you got Kairos Fate Weaver, or one of his minions in this case, and you're battling up against Khorne. Khorne brings a fair bit of heavy infantry into fights. You've got a lot of armored Chaos Warriors, and you got to stand off against a pretty large army. And so you need some good support units. Tzeentch can't really take the same kind of beating in melee that a lot of factions can. So do Exalted Flamers potentially fit in to a Tzeentchy army? Let's take a look here at what I've set up. I got some blue horrors up front, pinks, and a couple of Forsaken in the second line. I have an Exalted Flamer on both flanks. Now, Exalted Flamers, as we saw, are just not really quite as good at missile units as the standard Flamers. So, what could they be good for? Well, one of the benefits they're going to have from being a single entity is that they're going to be a little more survivable as a whole than the multiple entity variant, because they have roughly the same amount of hit points, but remember that in a multiple entity variant, there's going to be, those are going to be divided across all the entities. So it's possible that entities die, and you start losing firepower as entities die. So the Exalted Flamer has significantly more weapon damage than it does, and it has far better melee attack as well. So the Exalted Flamer really kind of fits in my opinion, in this niche. You saw here, like, I can get some damage done against a high-value target on the flank. Like, these Chaos Warriors are moving out towards my flank. I'm able to take some shots, do some decent damage to them. See, I've already made this unit fairly combat ineffective. And then if it gets forced into a melee, like, say it gets charged by some hounds, it has to face off against just a few infantry or something like that, it'll do okay. You wouldn't want it to sit there for too terribly long, but, you know, I have Screamers flying around for support. You have something like that set up, and then I think that's probably the niche where the Exalted Flamer fits in. And then we would probably need to ask ourselves, well, Air, couldn't you still just use the regular Flamers and basically the same role? For the most part, yes, except those regular Flamers are going to absolutely disintegrate under, say, like a Fleshhound charge or any other infantry. They're going to absolutely fall apart. The Exalted Flamer will last a little longer in that fight. You can see here, again, nice damage from the flanks for the Exalted Flamer, and if it has to get into a melee, it can hold its own for a moment. Like I said, it's not going to be an amazing melee unit. It's not something I recommend that you throw quickly into melee, but Flamers don't have a lot of ammunition. And the standard Flamers, when they run out of ammunition, are basically completely worthless in a melee. Look here, a few Fleshhounds charge this thing. It's going to hold its own. It's going to be able to dish a little damage back to them. Standard Flamers just wouldn't be able to do it. And so even though it's weak and it takes damage to even just a few Fleshhounds, it's, like I said, still going to be head and shoulders above the standard Flamers. So that is really the only niche where I can see the Exalted Flamer fitting in. It costs more, it's going to be more upkeep, it's a little more meticulous to use, but it's going to be slightly better at helping you out on a flank or just wherever you really find yourself needing a bit of extra melee in a pinch. So that's really the only place, in my opinion, that I see for an Exalted Flamer. Otherwise, a standard Flamer, just if you're looking for a missile unit, go with the standard Flamer. If you're looking for a little bit more of a hybrid unit, then you would go with the Exalted Flamer. So I think that's going to be the difference. Would these things ever make sense in multiplayer? I doubt it. Maybe. Very, very niche situation, but I doubt it. I think since the standard Flamers just do way more DPS, and which is damage per second, and they do it, I mean, obviously way more DPS means that they're doing their damage faster. And that's the real key. They cost less, they do their damage faster, and then because they are not a single entity, they kind of spread out wider. And their damage will cover an infantry unit a little better than, say, like an Exalted Flamer. And so I just feel like overall, from what we've seen here tonight, the Exalted Flamer is a little bit underwhelming, in my opinion, whereas the Flamers are pretty impressive in the right scenario. Again, they are a complete glass cannon. They absolutely fall apart. get a charge on a BC. Like, this one picked up 900 gold value in a pretty short time in that battle, so they can do it. The Exalted Flamers, like I said, they have a place where they can work. I think that place is very specific. I think it mostly makes sense in campaign, probably almost never in multiplayer. But the standard Flamers, again, if you're just looking for the pure damage, they're going to be the better choice. This is almost similar in some ways to our discussion about War Wagons. The War Wagons didn't cause damage as much quickly, but they were harder to kill. And that's going to be basically the case here. So anyway, hopefully this was helpful to you all. I know it's pretty short, but honestly, I don't think we really need a whole lot here. I could have tested against a lot of other unit types, but I think this is going to turn out mostly the same as we go through that. But you all tell me what you think. Get down there in the comments and let me know. Hope you enjoyed it and hope it was helpful. Tell me what units do you want to see next. We've looked at Little Grom, we've looked at Crane Gunners, we've looked at the Sky Junk. It wasn't technically a unit spotlight video, but it kind of was. So we've looked at a few units here. We looked at the Flamers, of course. Now we looked at the Exalted Flamer. What would you all like to see next? What units should we take a look at and take a bit deeper of a dive into? HeirofCarthage signing out for now. I'll see you all soon with some more action in Total War Warhammer 3.